Fill her up.
You're listening to the Gas Digital Network.
Ladies and gentlemen, your host for the House of Hardcore podcast, Tommy Dreamer.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the House of Hardcore podcast. I'm your host, Tommy Dreamer, and this week I have Impact Wrestling's own commentator, Tom Hannifan. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. You know, I never thought I'd have a show where it was like Tom and Tom on the same show and like that complication. I've had Tom and Jerry when I worked with King, and it's just a cat and mouse game, so
Nice.
This will be different.
TNT, that was another great show.
There you go.
Are you old enough to enjoy TNT?
Oh gosh, so I was born in 1989, so I'm loosely aware of it, but I can't remember when it aired.
God, I was 2 years in the business when you were, 1 year in the business, two. I started in 88, was undefeated, man. Had 2 years, 2 matches, and that 188 and 4 in 89. It was a great year. It's undefeated for 2 years, and then it's been all downhill ever since.
You take those runs where you can get them, man. I mean, who cares?
6-0 for 2 years. That's pretty impressive.
It's not bad. Hey, I've never been beat, you know.
You're still
beaten
undefeated.
up.
All right. I ask everybody, what got you hooked on this wonderful world of professional wrestling?
I think it's a complicated answer for me in that I think the first match that I saw that I was hooked on was the triangle ladder match at WrestleMania. And it was the Hardy Boys against the Dudley Boys against Edge and Christian. And I was like, oh my God, this is an absolute car crash. Look at what they're doing to themselves. This is amazing. But I was a kid, and I've told this on other shows, is that my parents really were not okay with me watching wrestling. And you can imagine why at that time. Mm-hmm. So the entire wave of ECW, I lived in the greater Philadelphia area. I missed all that because it wasn't okay for me to really be watching much of it. So my indoctrination into wrestling really came in WWE as getting hired at age 23. But before then, it was like being a fan as a kid, being a fan loosely of it in high school, lost it in college. You know, you have other things you're focusing on. But I will never forget that triangle ladder match, what became TLC, of how ridiculous it was what those guys were doing to their bodies. And then when I eventually became aware of ECW, your work, and many other people's, and then especially started working in the business, I was like, oh yeah, this is brutal on these guys' bodies, and they're really putting it all on the line. So it was interesting in retrospect that was what got me hooked into the business.
How dare your parents not want you to watch a program with people who's smoking, drinking, making drug references, cursing, doing all these things, bleeding?
I know. I don't want to frown on other people who are like, oh, I've been watching since I was a kid. And I'm like, your parents must have been like really, really cool and really, okay with a lot of this stuff, because it was I refer to it as kind of the sex, drugs, and rock and roll era of wrestling. So yeah, I completely understand in retrospect why my parents weren't okay with it.
I had a deal with my parents because I loved wrestling. My parents were very, very supportive. That wrestling aired Tuesday nights on the Spanish channel UHF, where there was there was channel 2, 4, 7, 9, 11, 13, and UHF. So 7 channels, and you could get it. And the Air Florida Championship Wrestling aired at 11:30 at night on a Tuesday night. I'm 9 to 10 years. I'm 10 years old. For my deal I cut with my parents was I was horrible to wake up for school, but except for Wednesday, because if I did not get up Wednesday for staying up late, they would not let me watch what happened to Dusty Rhodes or anything Florida Championship Wrestling that day. So I would be wiped out on Wednesdays, but I made sure I got up. And then I remember my mom coming in. I was, kind of falling asleep, and Blackjack Mulligan got stabbed by Kevin Sullivan in his heart. And he also was bleeding out of his heart, and Dusty's crying. And my mother's like, what the hell are you watching? And she really questioned. She questioned professional wrestling. My father was like, I guess it's okay. He's not failing in school but so I get all those parent limitations because trust me, now that I gave my 20s to ECW, my 30s to WWE, my 40s, and now my 50s to kind of like myself. But I meet so many people that tell me, dude, I grew up on ECW, blah, 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 or the worst is I had my first beer with the Sandman in the back of a parking lot. And I'm like, cool, how old were you? He's like, oh, I got to be like 17, 18. I was like, good, that's great.
Kind of insane. Yeah.
Or back when marijuana was illegal, it was like, yeah, I smoked a joint with X wrestler. And I was like, great. Please don't tell me that when you were 16 years old and you're doing something illegal with people who were my friends.
Well, and then the counter, you're also like, oh, maybe should Sandman have been like, how old are you, kid? And then also it's like, nah, they weren't doing that either. It's like on both sides, you're like, yep, that sounds about right.
Yeah, even him. The best was when we went to WWE and we had that summer run, and Sandman, we would always card people because we're now working for WWE. So it showed progress for the crazy ECW. And he'd be like, let me see your ID. And they'd show us, and then he'd pour the beer on them. We're in WWE now. We have to show growth.
All grown up.
Did you have a favorite?
Honestly, and you might hate this because it's another ECW guy and it's not you. It was Rob Van Dam. I loved RVD. I was all about RVD when he won both titles at, was it One Night Stand 05 or 06?
06.
06. Between the way he moved, the way he cut promos, what he did in the ring, his gear was always cool. Like, he was just Mr. Cool. And then for him to win both titles that night, I was like, oh, this, like, it felt real to me in that moment. You know, that whole invasion angle that was going on shortly before that and around that time. I was, that was really when I was kind of deepest into wrestling. So I was like, whoa, the WCW guys and the ECW guys are taking over WWE. So like, I was a kid, I wasn't even a teenager yet. So I was like, oh, this is the coolest thing ever. But Rob Van Dam, I got to call some of his matches in WWE, and that was a pinch me moment. So Rob Van Dam was definitely one of my favorites. I love the Dudley Boys, got to work with both of them. As I mentioned, like that's one thing I always look back on is like, it's the old adage of like, don't meet your heroes. And I'm really fortunate. Like, I got to meet all three of the teams and every guy involved in the triangle ladder match. And I'm glad that I met all of them. So I'm glad that I had the chance to work with all of them in a significant way. So I just feel very lucky and fortunate for a guy who just, again, got really lucky at age 23 and broke into the business and just kind of had to learn from the ground up.
Yeah, it's very cool. And Rob was so unique. And so, like, a lot of people don't realize how big Rob is, as well as how thick he is.
Thick.
And the stuff that he was able to do. And I mean, from early Rob Van Dam, but just like, hitting his stride from ECW, and then to WWE's credit, as well as for Vince. I remember specifically about Rob changing his stuff up, and like the frog splash, it was Vince who's like, you're going to sell this after you hit it. It's going to get it over more. And he was right. And also, like, WWE version at times was watered down Rob Van Dam, but the people would still react, and he made the most money and was so like next level over than things. And it's just a different system, and then different eyes on you, because no longer are Paul's eyes on you. It's Vince's eyes. And, Rob, super duper successful and happy he's recognized for his work. And if it wasn't for him, that whole ECW One Night Stand, the first one, would never have happened. So that's very, very cool, and still crushing it at the same age as me. Actually, he's a little older than me, 51 years old. Just did it. He did, man. He looks great, and he's dealt with a lot physically and dealing with concussions and all that stuff. And the fact that he's still out there doing it is very, very cool. Now, let me ask you this. How did you ever want to be a wrestler?
No. So I had to take very basic bump training in WWE. I don't think I've ever told this story. And it was a safety precaution, because if you ever, for anybody that wants to be a wrestling interviewer, right? And you're in the ring in, dress shoes for men, or for women, if you're in heels or if you're in flats, I highly encourage flats. Getting out of the ring is not the easiest thing in the world, because those shoes are not built for grip. They're built for, fashion, whatever. So they would take us down to the performance center, and Matt Bloom would oversee things. Michael Cole was there because he was in charge of announcers, and it was like, you need to be able to escape the ring in dress shoes. So learning how to brace on the apron, what rope to grab, etc., how to move your body, and then just getting accustomed to it. So as part of that, it was like, okay, say you're doing an interview in the middle of the ring and you're with a talent, and then another talent comes from behind and attacks the wrestler that you're interviewing, and you have to feign taking a bump, or you have to be involved in that action. They need to know that A, you're capable of doing that so that they can use you for the segment, or B, if you're not if it doesn't look good, then they're not going to use you. A couple of things. So in the process of that, like, you guys all need to learn how to bump.
Wow.
So we didn't do a ton. It was like a one-day thing, and luckily I never had to put it into practice. But I took a bump and I forgot to breathe. I tucked my chin, and I see your face already, and you know exactly what I'm going to say. So my legs went straight up in the air. So at the same time, Cole and Bloom are like, you've got to sell when you do this. Like, you take the bump, but like, oh, you've got to sell. And I felt like Vince Vaughn in Wedding Crashers, where I was like, if I had any air in my lungs, I would scream at you. I'm like, I am selling you. So I'm like,
this is real.
Oh my God. Like, it knocks the wind out of you. So
Yeah.
I was just grateful I tucked my chin and I didn't snap my head back. So did front bumps where I was like, oh my God, how do you do this on your shoulder? And that was all in the center of the ring, man. So the first thing I thought of was guys like freaking Rob. I know Mustafa Ali in WWE does that 450 in the corner. And I was like, to land on that, on your forearms, your elbows, and your knees, I was like, what is wrong with these people? I mean that in the best way possible.
No, I agree, but it's commonplace. You think about like Undertaker's leg drop, where he puts the guy on the apron and walks the apron, boom. Or now it's commonplace where guys are taking harder bumps on the apron, and there's less room and there's more steel there.
What do you think is the attraction to doing that spot?
I blame ECW for everything. It's
in and out of the ring.
It's higher risk, and so people go ooh in a match. I mean, as simple as people, belly to back. Somebody picks them up and give them a belly to back on top of the apron. It's, if you think about, it's science, and when you're taking bumps, it's trying to eliminate the pain and it's a circumference where you're absorbing the bump on your back, on your, not on your head, and you're taking, your shock absorbers really are your arms. If you do it on the apron, half of that is now gone, and now it's less wood, like you said, you're doing in the middle where there's the most torque or give, but now you're doing it on the apron where there's less of that, and it's half your body. So it straight up science. And listen, I'd be a hypocrite because I just watched, thank you, social media, Bully Ray give me stalling suplex on the concrete. And I would do that every show. I was on the concrete, no mats, but I was also trained in a boxing ring. So you callous your body to the bumps. And when it makes no noise, like you said, it hurts, and it's a silencer. I remember my first bump and like driving home, and I was just like, oh, my head hurts. Like, I didn't think I had a concussion, but old school was, we want to break you down so you don't come back. And honestly, if you couldn't make it, or even, hitting the ropes for the first couple of times, and everyone will talk about the bruises. I remember lifting up my shirt and my mom crying because she was like, what happened to your body? And I was just like, oh, I was hitting the ropes. And like, she's looking at her son, it's
gruesome.
It's disgusting.
Looks like he got mauled by a bear or something.
Yeah. And you're still your mother's baby, and she has to see her, and this is what he wants to do for a future. And forget about ECW with my mom. She hated it because I would always come home with shit all over my head, like, being on fire, or like, always bleeding. When I went to WWE, it changed, but it is totally, totally different. They make you guys wear those, I've seen it before, the Styrofoam helmets?
Yeah, I think we had to. Just again, safety was the whole object, and like we're in-ring interviewers, ring announcers, play-by-play commentators, etc. Like, you're fortunate to have people that you work with that are either retired wrestlers or still know how to bump. Look at what Byron Saxton just did at WrestleMania for Stone Cold Steve Austin. Corey Graves is capable. There's plenty of people that can do that. And even Matthew Raywalt recently for us on Impact hopped out of the booth and into the ring. So you have those guys, which are great, but it doesn't necessarily feel right for a wrestler to interview a wrestler. So it's like, yeah, you've got to have those options. And it's like anything in wrestling. If it doesn't look good, you're not going to do it. And if the person doesn't feel comfortable or doesn't feel safe doing it, you're absolutely not going to do it. So they were great. Bloom and Cole definitely got a good laugh at me slowly dying in the center of the ring, which I was like, yeah, I'm like, I'd be doing the same thing if I was in your shoes.
It's a lot too about respect if you really break it down, because if you were a commentator for football and they're not going to say, okay, you're going to be the quarterback, try throwing the ball. Now, hey, we're going to put you in there full pads and someone's going to hit you.
Right. Outside of high school football, that's my only real understanding of it. So, you can watch these sports and be like, oh, I remember when I played t-ball or basketball in the neighborhood or something like that. And it's like, no, you really have no idea. So it was invaluable. And again, I see some of these bumps guys take and I'm just like, good God, like, you admire them and you thank them for that, because that's what gets people to tune into the shows sometimes.
Right.
But, I'm like, yeah, I have no interest in wrestling an actual match. No way.
I think you'd be a great heel manager, but that's a whole other story.
Oh, well, thank you. Okay. We'll go down that road eventually.
But then means you got to take bumps. So, so how do you said you got hired at 23, but how does this like journey begin for you? Like, obviously, did you want to be a broadcaster? Like, did you know what you wanted?
Absolutely. So I went to Penn State for broadcast journalism, emphasis on sports broadcasting. So like anybody, I graduated school and it's like trying to find a job. And it was the beginning of the sports broadcasting market getting shrunk down to the point where like, oh, you're a play-by-play guy. Great. We're also going to ask you to do 3 other jobs, but pay you the value of 1 job. And naturally, like any kid coming out of school, you got to cut your teeth and break in where you can. So I was doing play-by-play for a men's and women's Division III basketball team, and then a little bit for their football team in Central Pennsylvania. And I get a job lead online that says WWE, which you and I both know now presently what the company is. That would never happen. That doesn't really go on. There's agents and all that stuff. So my roommate at the time was like, do it. You'll screw up. It'll be funny. Maybe you'll meet John Cena or something like that. I was like, I don't think that's going to happen. So I sent in a submission because they didn't want to see play-by-play. So I basically just pitched myself for a couple of minutes on camera. I went in and I auditioned with John Gaborik, Big, and Josh Matthews. So eventually, fast forward roughly 10 years to when I'm now having a conversation with Josh Matthews about potentially joining Impact Wrestling. And then he's my executive producer. It blows my mind because he was literally there my first day in quote unquote the business at my audition. And then I got hired. That was June of 2012. And I got hired September of 2012.
Hey there, auto mechanics and super cool do-it-yourself guys who work on their own cars. I want to tell you about rockauto.com, the online store with every auto part at the best prices. This is your one-stop shop for everything auto parts. Rockauto.com has been in business for 20 years, and they make it easy to find parts you need at the best possible prices. No more talking to counter guys who need to order your parts, aren't really sure what you're looking for, never have quite what you need, and then after all that hassle, will still charge you storefront markups. At rockauto.com, you can easily find everything you need. And whether you're a mechanic, an auto shop, or working on your own car, everyone has access to the same incredible pricing at rockauto.com. So if you're a car guy, right now, go to rockauto.com and check out all the parts available for your car. You're going to have so much fun looking at car parts. So once more, go to rockauto.com. No promo code needed, as their pricing is already that good. When you order, make sure you tell rockauto.com that you heard about them right here on the House of Hardcore podcast. rockauto.com. Now let's get back to it. I don't think most people realize how hard it is to do what you do. And it's totally different from Impact Wrestling, but I went, me and Dave LaGreca, we had to call a baseball game. I love baseball. I love all sports. And I'm prepared, man. And I don't have stat sheets. Then I'm sitting there, but I know what I'm going to talk about. And then all of a sudden I I have to learn how to properly pronounce people's names. I have to do it fast. I literally lasted a half of an inning. And then I realized people aren't here to listen to Tommy Dreamer, the pro wrestler, talk, because it was for radio. They're here to listen to a game. And they don't care about stories of wrestling, because every time I'm talking, the lead host is like, and that's a ball, high and outside. And as I'm continuing the story, and I'm serious, like I'm out of things to say, and it's a half of an inning.
Mm-hmm.
And now you have to sit there and talk. For Impact, it's 2 hours. You've also done it for Raw, which is 3 hours. And yes, you also have to remember things. You have to, I don't know if we'll get into it if people are in your ear telling you things, but obviously you have a producer, Kevin Dunn, who's telling you stuff. You have, if Vince is there, you have an agent, you have all these things going into your head at the same time where you're also just trying to do your job. And like, I think about it's you're the storyteller. I was blessed to have some of the greatest, Joey Styles, JR, Michael Cole. And it's like, wow, until you sit in that chair, you don't realize how much stuff's really going on.
It's a lot because there's certain times where you have to get in a certain story. There's certain ways to phrase things that make it sound better, whether it's a heel or a baby face. I'm so grateful I get to work with Matthew Raywall, because he and I are constantly sitting there at ringside at TV tapings, just kind of batting ideas back and forth. How do you want to handle this? Is this better from me? Is this better from the heel or the baby face? And how should we deliver this? When should we deliver this? And there's a lot of thought that goes into it. But even, to your point about calling conventional sports, I've called football, basketball, hockey, soccer, just about everything you can think of from my time at Penn State and then recently. And the biggest thing I've come back to is that you kind of have to just let the game unfold, whether it's a game or a match or whatever. You have to see where it goes. And that absolutely plays into calling wrestling, because you and I might have a discussion 6 hours before a match goes down. And then when we actually get to that point, a spot here and there could have changed. An injury could happen. There could be a production malfunction. There's so many things that could change. And I find it so valuable that, you as an agent, or whether it's Scott D'Amore or Gail Kim or D'Lo Brown, whoever is producing that match, has access to us and can be like, hey, here's a story note, because you don't have me on your hip all day as you're producing your match with talent. You could text me if it comes to mind, but you might be in the spur of the moment, be like, oh, I got to tell commentary this. And then it's like, is it better from Tom? Is it better from Raywall, heel or babyface, etc.? So there's so many layers that go into it. Honestly, I could do hours about theory behind wrestling commentary, but I'm really fortunate. Like you said, I briefly interacted with JR early in NXT, spent the bulk of my career learning from Michael Cole, and he taught me just about everything that I know at this point. Grateful I got to work with King, Booker T, JBL, who taught me a ton, Samoa Joe, Byron Saxon, Corey Graves, who's my guy, Matthew Raywalt, like Renee Paquette, Beth Phoenix. Like, it's just, and I'm leaving out others, not intentionally, but still, like, just, I'm fortunate that I had good people around me, and that's really what builds it after a while, because you can't just be like, well, I'm just going to go out there and call it. If you've got good dance partners in wrestling, that's the ticket.
Yeah. It is so much different, and you've listed a lot of people. Now, also part of your job. Well, let me just backtrack for a second. So you're coming up, like, how do you start like paying your dues within the WWE system? Okay, here's our new announcer. Are you an interviewer? Like, how does that whole...
When I first started, I was working pretty much exclusively in Stamford, Connecticut, and then I do these studio shows, these wraparound shows that aired internationally and never aired in the United States. And that's how I first met Renee, is that she and I were working the studio, and she had plenty of TV experience from working at the Score in Canada. She taught me how to walk. I had never used a prompter before. I never even worked in a studio before. So she taught me how to walk as a broadcaster, regardless of the subject matter, and then gradually took the training wheels off. And I forget at one point, shortly after I got hired, starting going down to NXT. And at the time, it's very similar to the model that Impact does now. And that it's like, hey, we're going to knock out 2 weeks of TV, 3 weeks of TV. We got to do 5 weeks of TV, something like that, all dependent. But there were multiple broadcasters that are being cycled in and out. At the time, there's a guy named Tony Dawson, now Tony Luffman in his real name, very talented guy. He had been hired a little bit ahead of me, so he was getting more reps on play-by-play, and then they had called him up to call, I think it was WWE Superstars at the time. Now it's basically WWE Main Event. So I kind of slid into his spot, and then Byron Saxon and I were trading reps here and there. So it was pretty much just like, this is your one show. So it's like you get 6 matches and then you're off. And then the next guy comes in and you get another 6 matches. So it was, I equate it in sports to like a quarterback getting a couple series and then being pulled and then getting put back in. So it was tough. But I was predominantly getting used, in the episodes, I wasn't doing play-by-play. I was working as a backstage interviewer. I was getting opportunities to go on the road every once in a while, just kind of see what main roster TV was like. And I really didn't start doing anything in terms of like live event hosting, ring announcing till late 2015, early 2016. And I'm glad I did it. I wish I'd done it sooner. I think I was stubborn in that I didn't really know what I was getting into. I think I was like, oh, okay, they like what I do. And, here's your assignments. And that's the end of it. It was like, no, they wanted to see a little bit more initiative and me to get more involved. So it took me a while to get that message. And I'm like, I'm just grateful people like Michael Cole and Triple H, like, were patient with me and understood I was a kid and I was trying to learn this on the fly. So ultimately I relocated to Orlando in 2016 to work out of the PC. And that was literally like 6 days a week on a regular basis, doing house shows and armories in the state of Florida, and then working with the rest of the announcers in terms of what they were trying to accomplish, what they needed out of backstage interviewers, ring announcers, et cetera. Because at that point, I had a pretty good fix on what they were looking for. And then it was also, I had to learn in the process what I needed to deliver at play-by-play. So it all just kind of built from one thing to the next. And it's something I always recommend to anybody that's trying to get into commentary in professional wrestling, is that you've got to start with, and not to call it a basic position, but like you have to start with ring announcing and learn that craft, and then learn hosting for an audience, and then learn backstage interviewing. And then you can graduate maybe to color commentary or play-by-play, because they all build on each other as these really valuable layers. And I kind of did it backwards. Not through any fault of WWE's, but just because I was a little stubborn, and I'm still stubborn to this day. So
the JR told me when I went to WWE, he's like, you wore many hats in the business. And he's like, that's invaluable because you're not going to be a wrestler forever. And I was just like, well, it's pretty profound, and he was like, I know you know a lot of stuff from this is coming from ECW. And he was so right. My trainer, WWE Hall of Famer Johnny Rodz, was your graduation. You had to break down and then build the ring by yourself, which sucked. But he's like, if you're going to have respect for this business, you're going to learn how to build a ring, because everything happens here.
How long did it take you to do that by yourself?
Oh, dude, it was like 6 hours.
Oh,
and it was just, hey, the ring was broken down. We used to sometimes have to break down, but for me, we had to, hey, it's broken down. Now you want to train today, you got to build it. And I'd be like, you're moving 75-pound steel post by yourself. It's also building strength. You put the post down, then you got to get the other one. And then you're trying to line up these giant steel girdings, to connect it. Oh, I'm too far. Oh, I'm too close. But once you get to put that ring together, it's like, hey, look what I did. And it's kind of the same thing if you like, hey, look what you did, because then I know like you actually help train people for their jobs, which is super duper cool, because then WWE trusts you that you knew enough to help train the next generation of people.
It meant a lot to me to get that trust at such a young age, because, I was there from 2012 to 2021. So like 2016, 2017, I kind of start taking on quote unquote management or leadership roles. And I definitely was like, I don't know if I'm prepared for this, if I'm ready for this, if I can handle this. And it was a ton of trial and error. And I'm so glad that I got to work with a lot of people and bring in a lot of people that are still there to this day and are doing really, really good stuff in the world of wrestling. But it was scary because like I think one of the most daunting ones was I remember working with Beth Phoenix and trying to help her get ready for NXT and then like working with her week to week. So we'd be on Zoom calls and then I'd screen share, we'd watch back a show or something like that. And it was like, what you like, what you didn't like. Well, just off camera is Edge. No pressure. And it's like, hey, no pressure because you're already speaking to one Hall of Famer in Beth Phoenix, who I respect immensely. And then just off camera is Edge, another WWE Hall of Famer. And I was like, yep, just don't say anything stupid, don't screw this up, and just don't screw this up. So but I think that's wrestling, man. And I know you can attest to this. Is like, how often do people actually experience something in this business that they were ready for? It doesn't happen. You get thrown to the wolves, so to speak. It doesn't matter what company you work for. You just kind of get in there and it's sink or swim. And that's the beauty of it. That's why I love it.
Were you responsible for taking Vic Joseph and Matt Camp away from House of Hardcore? You son of a bitch.
Yes.
It was you.
Yes, it was
me. It was me.
It was me. And our primary recruiter at the time was Rhino. Because literally, like, I would get tapes all the time and I would be watching plenty of other wrestling promotions, Impact, obviously, Ring of Honor, New Japan, etc., and then smaller promotions because people would send me tape. And I remember going up to Rhino because like he was pretty well, entrenched in terms of indie bookings and such. And I was like, do you know anybody out there that's, and he was like, oh yeah, I got some people. So he sent Vic Joseph along and he sent Alicia Taylor along. Matt Camp got introduced to me, I think, through Vic Joseph. I hope I'm remembering that correctly. And they all proved me right. So I'm very happy for the three of them because Alicia Taylor, I think, is one of one as a ring announcer. I think Vic Joseph is an outstanding play-by-play guy and has rolled with the punches with that brand. And Matt Camp, I knew they were looking for like an insider, like an Adam Schefter, so to speak. And I was like, oh, yeah, he's right over there. And he's proved that he is that guy for WWE. So sorry about that, but
that's all right.
Thank you.
Mike, thanks for putting my business out of business. Now is the COVID. Actually, Vic, out of everybody that left House of Hardcore, I had always envisioned me and Vic like kind of standing next to in the mountain and being like, hey man, we made it. Because he was really, he did a lot for me and for the company. And I think he's a great commentator. And he had told me like that you had helped him a lot, which was cool. My other thing is I think it's cool that Cole is finally getting his due in the sense of he was there a long time. And when I was there, people did not like him. And I'm talking about fans. And I'm talking about like, he was just like, he took the brunt of everything. Like, and now like anyone who wasn't Cole was good. But I always like, cause I would listen to him and I'm like, man, he's great. And I knew his background, cause I was friends with him, but the final that he's getting those accolades of he's really good at his job, is really, really cool. And even to like, you're showing him and Pat McAfee just enjoying sitting back watching wrestling, you know, and calling it because it's key, I got three more and then I'll let you go. One, do you have a favorite broadcaster as you growing up? Doesn't so much have to be in wrestling, but
I think some people might know him, but like he's pretty he works quite a bit for ESPN, but Dan Schulman, he works a lot of college basketball with Jay Billis, and I just think he's just outstanding. I love the sound of his voice. I think he works really well. He tells stories. He asks questions. He's got good information. His emotion is outstanding. So I always liked him. And then you talk about Michael Cole, his old roommate at one point at Syracuse was Mike Tirico. Mike Tirico, who now with NBC, is ridiculously talented. There's stuff that you'll see him do that he's just coming up with off the top of his head, and you can't believe he didn't write that. So there's a lot of guys like that I'm still trying to piece together who I am as a broadcaster now at 33. And I'm constantly looking to people within wrestling and outside of wrestling of like, oh, I like that they did that. How can I apply that? How can I get better?
Do you have a favorite moment for yourself
Within wrestling?
within anything?
Mm,
Obviously, listen, no matter what happens in your life, wrestling opened all those doors.
true.
So
I got to work with the production team behind Jackass, which I know is going to sound weird because it's like, oh, you got to call all these things in wrestling, et cetera. And like, those are really special to me. But like, I grew up a huge fan of Jackass.
me too.
I got to work with Jeff Tremaine and his entire production staff at Gorilla Flicks because they were producing that WWE Network show Swerved, which was just a big prank show. And the show did not go over well amongst certain people because it was a prank show and people knew about certain things and didn't know about other things. So some people liked it, some people didn't. But I got electrocuted by a stool by the Jackass people. I got to then mess with other people with them on the red carpet at the WWE Hall of Fame. I got to mess with people backstage at a show in Norfolk, Virginia. And I was like, this is a job for these people. I was like, this is the greatest thing ever. So it was me living out part of my childhood. And I watched all the Jackass films and such. And I was like, to this day, that is one of the coolest freaking things I can say is on my resume.
What is your favorite call? Listen, I study. I am weird. I have a crazy brain. But like your favorite call that you've ever heard, and I mean, going to Kirk Gibson's home run, like, go crazy, folks. Like, there's so many different great calls. Do you have a favorite, or do you have a favorite in wrestling?
Ooh, that is really tough. I think within conventional sports, man, that is really tough. Within conventional sports, God, the Kirk Gibson one is fantastic. Let me come back to that one because let me think.
Right.
Wrestling's easier for me to answer in that I loved the simplicity behind Cole calling the Undertaker's streak getting snapped by Brock Lesnar. It was so simple. All he said was the streak is over. And then they didn't say anything for 3 minutes. And if you go back and you watch the streak before that, he would do that on pinfalls. He would do the streak continue, he would keep it simple like that so that you had heard that line for years at that point in multiple Undertaker matches at WrestleMania. So for him to hit that and for it to finally come out of Cole's mouth, the streak is over. 4 words. That's it. It's beautiful. That's the thing about wrestling commentary that I think people think you've got to write this, paragraph with the English language and it's got to be flowery and eloquent. It's like, no, sometimes it's 1 or 2 words and that's it. So I always love that one in the history of wrestling. That's definitely one of my favorites. I guess I would have to go with the Kirk Gibson home run call because that was just magical. And even though that was before my time, it just holds up, man. And that's the thing that I love about sports is that if you capture the emotion properly, you live forever.
Yeah.
And the same thing goes in wrestling. And that's what we're all trying to do, I think, in commentary is that we want to leave our mark and we want to leave, a good soundtrack for these special moments. So I love that one.
The Rangers, they just got eliminated. But when they were advancing, it was like a couple of seconds to go. And I seriously went back when they advanced to the Stanley Cup and it was Mateau. He just said the guy's name 3 times. But it like you said, it's a moment that stays with you forever. The catch, there's so many different great things with some great audio, and that audio will stay forever. I mean, I grew up in New York and Phil Rizzuto, holy cow. And it's so simple, but it worked.
Well, I will make a quick correlation from sports to wrestling. So when Kofi won at WrestleMania, Kofi Mania, that's one of my favorite calls that I've ever been a part of. And I modeled it after Doug Flutie's miracle Hail Mary pass for a touchdown to win the game. And if you hear the radio commentary for that game, it's Flutie did it, Flutie did it, Flutie did it. So I went, Kofi did it, Kofi did it, Kofi did it. And because he's a Boston guy, he's a BC guy. So that was like my little sports thing that I was like, oh, like I'm probably the only one that knows this. But I just was like, oh, I think it was standing because it was such a powerful moment. And I was like, oh God, this everything just came together for that moment. And you felt it in your gut.
Nice. Coming up is Slammiversary, or when this airs, Slammiversary will have ended its 20 years. You're the lead guy now. I know there's a big difference between WWE and Impact Wrestling. What does that mean to you that you weren't really a part of this company's 20 years, but now you're, again, the main storyteller for it and getting here's the ball. Talk to us on perhaps one of the biggest shows of this company's history.
It's something that this show's really special for me, and I get sentimental because for the better part of 9 years in WWE, I was fighting to try to prove I could be the guy. After Cole was done, that I could be the guy. So for that to come to an end, and then to find a new home and Impact where I just still can't get over how welcoming everybody has been and how nice everyone has been, and to be given the role of, you're the lead play-by-play guy, we want you to be the voice. And from the second I started at Hard to Kill to what we did at Slammiversary, I can't even explain how emotional it makes me, just because it's in a way all I ever wanted. And now with Slammiversary, it's not lost on me the voices that have preceded me: Mike Tenay, Don West, Jeremy Borash, Matt Stryker, Josh Matthews, who we talked about before. He gets to hold me by the hand through these broadcasts. So, and he's been there, done that. So it's not lost on me. And to do it with Ray Wall is fantastic. Like, I love working with him. And even though I've only been here for about 6 months or something like that, I have felt so welcomed that it does feel like home. And hopefully there's many more like this to come.
I popped, there was a line you guys just hit about you should get fired. You're like, I technically just got here.
I know.
That was a great line.
Gallo, you should get
Yes.
I nearly said it. And then I should have said to them, you should get fired again.
Well, I'm going to leave it at that because it's really, really good. And I'm happy that I had met you in WWE, but I'm happy that I get to hang out with you because we've kind of hit it off and bonded. And it's really, really cool that I get to hang out with you at least once a month. So
same, man. It's been invaluable to me.
Life is blessed.
You as the consigliere of Impact, and your friendship means a lot.
How can fans find you on social media?
Go to @Tom Hannifan on Instagram and Twitter. It's spelled @TOMHANNIFAN. It's a weird Irish last name. It's way harder than Phillips, but yeah, I'm at Instagram and Twitter. And then I've got my own podcast on Penn State football. If there's any crossover here of people that actually want to listen to that, go for it. It's all on my social media pages. And then Impact Wrestling every Thursday night on Access TV.
Well, thank you for being part of this week's episode of the House of Hardcore podcast. I appreciate you.
You too, man.